and we are already live. So let's start. The phones can go on to silent. And so we are discussing chapter 5 of the NISM, and it's also. Can you just check the voice because we are live now? So just put your phones on silent mode. Naveen, your phone is on silent. Okay. So this is chapter 5, which talks about economic analysis, and I would have taught economic analysis in my style, but the problem is this is a this is a certification, so we have to stick to the textbook on, है ना? हाँ, close the doors and all, and we have to stick to the certification only. For ventilation we have this. If you feel hot, then you can open that. So what are we discussing here in this chapter? One is principles of macroeconomics versus macro, and micro versus macro, correct? Then we are also handling what are the key economic variables from from fundamental analysis perspective. Fundamental analysis, because this is a fundamental analysis. This is a research analyst book, no? Third is where would you get these information? So sources of information, and that's why I always keep talking about it. We've seen that as an analyst, you should know all possible sources from where you can source your data. That's the first thing. The first way I would know is whether you have experience or not. When I ask you to download the data, whether you already know a site from where the data can be downloaded. So that I should know. So I can gauge from your experience whether you know, whether you have understood my point of view, whether you have asked the right question there and then, or are you asking a question 5 hours later. So that talks about the experience. Also, do you know all the data sites? And that is what is it is training you on sources of information versus uh, versus all the variables versus all the data economic variables. Also, the role of economic analysis in equity research. So what's the role? I'll put it here. What's the role of economic analysis in FA or in research, in equity research? Role of economic analysis in equity research. And the last is understanding the nature of cyclical and secular. So there is something known as cyclical versus secular nature of the economy. So what is cyclical in nature and what is secular in nature? ठीक है, I mean, and I am hoping that all of you would attempt this exam, because one is that it is a regulation, second you are all finance students, so it should be there on your thing. It is not very difficult to have it. I think 15 days of preparation you can clear the exam easily. Okay, so now let us look at the basic principles of micro. So what is microeconomics? What does microeconomics study? Huh? That is demand and supply of who? Huh? So let me give you a question. Does it study the demand and supply or the individual behavior? Point number one. Does it study of the corporates? Does it study the behavior? Demand and supply is the behavior of government. Okay. One answer is individual from your side. How about you, Anand? Individual. पक्का है ना? Are you sure? हाँ, आई गेस सेंस इट, नो ऐसे देख रही है लेकिन सवाल ऐसे है, मन में खुद शक है, एंड दैट रिफ्लेक्ट्स फ्रॉम द आईज दैट यू आर हाँ, खुद में डाउट है, और आपके सवाल आंखें पूछ रहे हैं कि भाई आप ही बता दो कि मुझे सही बता रहे हो. दैट इज व्हाट इज क्वेश्चन मार्क इन योर दिस थिंग. सो दिस इज इंडिविजुअल. सो यू आर स्टडिंग द बिहेवियर ऑफ इंडिविजुअल्स, है ना? एंड द व्हाट इज so one is the behavioral aspect that you're studying of the individuals. The second aspect that you are studying is the decision to buy and consume based on the prevalent prices. The prices, current prices. So it is studying the behavior, point number one. Second, it is studying whether you will buy or not, or consume or not, at the prevalent prices. Why they are studying the buying behavior or the consumption behavior? So why not they studying the supply side of it? Correct. So these are what you just answered. Individuals are consumers. They can't produce. It is only in the age of Instagram that even individuals have become, or consumers have become producers, because they are selling some services. But all these, understand, the definitions are from pre-Instagram age, where individual was only consuming. Are we producing something? Yes, we are producing something. Right now, we are producing something. So the definition has changed. But this, as I said, I can go on questioning it, but then you will not clear the exam. You will have tons of knowledge, but exam will go for a toss. So from a question perspective, and these have all evolved from, say, the classical thoughts, the neoclassical thought. So you have to study the way it is that individuals, usually, if you remove the behavior on Instagram, where the individuals are also selling on social media, they are also selling, then you don't see employees generating anything. They're just consuming. From Monday morning until Friday or Sunday evening, they are consuming some of them. Okay? And they are consuming at what prices? Are they consuming at historical prices? Are they consuming at future prices? Are they consuming at prevalent prices? So they are consuming at prevalent prices. They are consuming at perfect. है ना? अब आइए आगे चलते हैं. So microeconomics is all about the study of the individuals. ये तो clear हो गया, है ना? And it also looks at the decision of the, है ना? It looks at the decision of the individuals. That is very, very clear. इसमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. ठीक है. And the individual of the focus on the drivers, and then अगर decision है, so what are the drivers for decision? What are the drivers for decision making is what they are looking at. ठीक है. Microeconomics is also looking at, how the free market works. How does the free market operate? Free market का मतलब क्या है? How would you define free market? And the decision का मतलब the keyword is hidden there in what I have written previously on the board. What is the definition of free market? Huh? Entry and exit, okay, but that is for firms. Anyone is allowed to trade? और बताइए. And so free market has another phenomena, that the prices in a free market are determined by the forces of demand and supply. So it is not a monopoly market. It is not an oligopoly market. It's a free market where the demand and supply works. Monopoly market, do you think demand and supply works? The prices are decided one side. If he wants to sell it cheap, it's his benevolence, it's his blessings. But if he wants to sell it expensive, it's his. He is the. He controls the market. For example, De Beers of the diamond market, if they want to sell at a certain price, they will sell at a certain price. Okay, is that clear? So free market also we understand. So it tells you how the free market operates. It also tells you how the price of products and services get determined. So how the prices get determined. अभी ये याद कैसे रहेगा? याद ऐसा रहेगा कि दोनों में ही फ्री मार्केट के सप्लाई फोर्सेस की बात है. And essentially how prices get determined in a free market, it is demand and supply. So the first paragraph and the second paragraph, or the first sentence or the second pointer, or the first bullet and the second bullet, are not talking anything else. They are just complementing each other. They are complementary in nature, and they are only talking about demand and supply. So all you have to understand is, if forces of demand and supply determine the free the prices, it would be known as a free market, it would be known as and that also serves the purpose of knowing microeconomics. Microeconomics is about free market, forces and demand and supply, understanding how prices get determined, using demand and supply, understanding how free market. So ये इसका overlap ही है. This translates to this one. I think that is clear. है ना? Free market means demand and supply. And in a, what will you do by understanding demand and supply? You will just understand how prices are determined. ऐसा ही था ना डिमांड एंड सप्लाई का. इसमें डिमांड कौन है, सप्लाई कौन सा है? नीचे से ऊपर जा रहा है वो डिमांड है. सो यू आर सेइंग डिमांड इज ट्रैवलिंग दिस वे. और सप्लाई कौन सा है? ये क्या है? अच्छा, नीचे क्या होगा ये बताइए. व्हाट फैक्टर वुड बी देयर एट द बॉटम? क्वांटिटी डिमांडेड है. अच्छा, और ऊपर क्या होगा? अच्छा, एक्स एक्सिस क्या होगा, वाई एक्सिस क्या होगा? डज प्राइस डिमांड क्वांटिटी और क्वांटिटी डिमांड प्राइस? व्हाट इज डिपेंडेंट, व्हाट इज इंडिपेंडेंट? अच्छा ठीक है, आप स्टोर जाते हो, ब्लिंकिट पे जाते हो, है ना? सेम थिंग इज सेलिंग फॉर, जो 200 रुपए की चीज इन अ मार्ट, in the mart that you see is selling, the same thing sells for 200 bucks, but when you go to Blinkit, the same thing is selling for 400. So which one is a dependent variable, which one is independent variable? Prices. So price should come here, है ना? MBA कर रहे थे ना हम लोग. And this is पक्का. As the price is lower down or lower itself, or someone lowers it, the quantity increases. Now tell me which one should be going up and which one should be going down. At higher prices, would you buy more quantity? Achha. At higher prices, will you at higher prices will you buy lower quantity at higher prices, है ना? So higher prices, है ना? Higher prices and lower quantity. And this should be the demand curve, है ना? Correct? And नहीं, एक मिनट फिर से. Look at this one. So this is price and this is quantity. Okay. Sorry. I think that was correct. So this is price and this is quantity. So will you supply more at higher prices? Obviously, a supplier would want to supply the maximum quantity. The higher the prices goes, he want to supply more. Correct? And at lower prices, you will consume more. So this should be demand and this should be supply. Confirm whether it is true or not. See, you have lower price and a higher quantity. Higher price and a lower quantity. That's rational human behavior. Do you agree? Yes or no? So should this be called the demand curve? Yes or no? It is. Obviously, it is parabolic and downward sloping. It is inversely proportional to the price. So this should be called the demand curve. लेकिन आपने कौन सा बताया था? कहाँ तक आ गए आप? In few months your placement. MBA में you already put 10 lakh rupees. 11th, 12th, graduation and then 7 years का ये मतलब है कि इसको आप, you're calling this as a demand curve and you're calling this as a supply curve. Demand curve, you know that you have read it, and just close your eyes and think about it. You've always been taught the demand curve is a downward sloping curve. It is also because of a factor which is when you consume more, the propensity to consume goes down. With every bite, you derive lesser satisfaction, which is known as marginal of utility. Correct? You remember that? So obviously you will consume less after a certain time. So now is it clear that which is demand and supply? So the prices are um, are demanded in a free market, or it's a free market thing. So it's a perfect market competition, as they call it. They are determined by the interaction of demand and supply, and this is known as, and this is the price basically. So this is the price that has been fixed. This is the quantity that you are buying. Correct? ऐसा ही होना चाहिए ना. Price impacts your demand, the quantity, not the other way around. Do you agree? So this should be the demand curve and supply curve, and hence the price curve. I also have studied after many years. I do not recollect, but I just out of logic and rational explanation, I think this should be there. यही होगा. देख लीजिए सर्च करके, आप देख लो डिमांड कर्व, आप सर्च करके देख लो, ऐसा ही मिलेगा आपको. It can be no other curve, because then you have to change the shape of the curve. Rationality cannot be defined. ठीक है. So what is macroeconomics? Once you have checked, confirm, and then let's quickly move to macroeconomics. What is macroeconomics, by the way? हाँ. Okay. हाँ. Okay. It was other way around. Then the graph has to change. अच्छा. तो मैंने तो इसमें जो है मुझे बताइए, then why it is downward sloping? हाँ. हाँ, तो एमबीए के पैसे आपने वसूल लिए मतलब. सो दिस इज, हाँ, कैसे दोनों सेंस बने, एक ही सेंस बने? It will make sense only one side. So at lower, see, as long as you can prove that higher price you are consuming less, then the graph is correct, है ना. बट आप उसमें, तो उसमें भी अगर आप लॉजिक दे रहे हो, तो आपका लॉजिक तो ये था कि इफ दिस इज प्राइस हियर एंड क्वांटिटी हियर, यू आर स्टिल थिंकिंग अबाउट दिस कर्व. ये तो सही नहीं हो सकता. इफ यू हैव प्राइस एंड क्वांटिटी हियर, you cannot be demand curve. Then that means that you are consuming a higher quantity at higher price, which is not logical. Then this curve is not correct. नहीं तो, हाँ, he said, नवीन ने बोला कि this should be an upward, है ना. अभी, हाँ, so quantity, but इसमें आप मुझे बताइए, just check and tell me which one is dependent. Which one is dependent, independent variable? That will change, because I have seen other graphs also. You will see that the graph, price should be independent. Exactly, that's my point. हाँ, वही मैं बोल रहा हूँ. So let's check. Out of price and quantity, if you can check which one is dependent, which one is independent, because that is a basic question of life. सब तो ग्राफ गलत है वो. So you can plot it the way you want, but then you can't call it the dependent and independent. You can plot a graph like this. See, does anyone change my view? I can have, for example, in trading view also, you've seen, I can have prices on this one and volumes on this one. Does anyone change my idea of plotting it? I can have price quantity here, and I can have price here. But then this graph is theoretically wrong, because the independent factor is here. And when you are discussing that, okay, the quantity should increase or decrease because of a factor, then that graph is absolutely wrong. तो वापस आपके पैसे वेस्ट हो गए, डबल वेस्ट हो गए, because you could not justify it. चलिए आगे बढ़ते, नहीं तो इस टॉपिक कभी खत्म नहीं होगा. But the point you have understood now, rational mind, and you can now argue logically which graph is right and which graph. So for now, please understand that the independent thing should come here, and quantity, to my understanding, is quantity is dependent on price. That's why in sale during monsoon season, you have too many people flocking in the mall, because price has an behavioral impact on the quantity and not other. It is an independent. This is, they reduce discount. They don't reduce the quantity. They don't say that we are giving you half of the jeans or half of the skirt at a reduced price. They don't cut the pant into two halves. They cut down the prices in a monsoon. So that means this is independent. So I think that graph is not correct. मतलब we can challenge it the graph. तो इसको आप घर जाके मुझे रिसर्च करना बताना कि which graph is correct and tomorrow let's discuss this. Otherwise it will become an elongated topic. But आइए मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स पे चलते हैं. वहां तो डिमांड की बात हो रही थी. इंडिविजुअल बिहेवियर मतलब डिमांड. ठीक है, इन अ नॉन सोशल मार्केटिंग एरा, बिकॉज अदरवाइज एवरी इंडिविजुअल इज कंज्यूमिंग समथिंग एंड सेलिंग समथिंग. तो सोशल मीडिया हटा दीजिए, है ना. अब मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक, अगर वो माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक स्टडीज द इंडिविजुअल बिहेवियर इन अ फ्री मार्केट ऑफ डिमांड एंड सप्लाई. सो व्हाट इज मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक स्टडी लार्जली? हाँ हाँ, बोलिए बोलिए. इकोनॉमी. सो इट इज स्टडिंग द फैक्टर्स दैट इन्फ्लुएंस व्हाट? डिमांड एंड सप्लाई, है ना, at the aggregate level, है ना, not at an individual level. And you're also studying the focus is on the supply side, है ना. While the oil is not coming, why is it getting delayed? When will Dubai send us? When will Iran send us? That is the focus of the government. Do you worry when will government send oil to various petrol pumps? That is not our study. So it is the study of, it is the work of the government to focus on this one. So demand and supply remains this thing, but the focus is on the supply side. Supply should not get disrupted. For example, during COVID in 2021 November, the microchips that goes into your phones, that goes into the laptop, and also goes into the cars. When the supply chain was disrupted, government was TCMC is the company which supplies to Intel, and then Intel sends you the Intel inside chip. Right? So, government of India was talking to Taiwanese government, or the Thai government, not Thai, the Taiwanese government, है ना, Taiwanese government, that how can we sort out this issue and why this problem occurred. There's a very nice study on this one, the supply chain problem on the supply, and this was done by McKinsey. Very beautiful study. It is in one of my fundamental analysis presentations. So it is all about the factors that influence the aggregate. So they are looking at not at the individual behavior, but you are looking at this. So the moment you come to macroeconomic class, you are focused more about the summation part, the whole of district, the whole of Pune, the whole of state, the whole of country. So the summation thing is important in a macroeconomic class. Understood, na? अभी वो ग्राफ से आप बाहर निकल जाओ ना, फोकस ऑन दिस क्लास. ग्राफ आप घर जाके देख लेना. वी विल हैव अ सेपरेट क्लास ऑन द ग्राफ, बिकॉज मुझे लग रहा है कि कहा क्लास है ना, द होल क्लास इज जस्ट hung up on hung on that whether the graph should be this way or that way. Okay, and we'll have a separate session on the demand and supply curve and how the supply is impacted, how the demand is impacted. Remember those curves where there were parallel curves versus non-parallel curves? So we will discuss that. That book unfortunately is gone down. I had kept the box outside, and the whole book someone has picked it. But that's okay. We have another books also. We'll pick out. So shift in the supply and demand curve. अभी हम क्या देख लेते हैं? So let's look at this one, and the things like unemployment rate, है ना, GDP rates, etc. ये सब हम कहाँ डिस्कस करेंगे? You will study in a macroeconomic class. What all will you discuss? Overall price levels, not individual price. Overall price levels, not the discounted price to an individual guy who stays in Vimannagar or who stays in Kalyani. We will look at inflation. We will look at savings rate. है ना? We will not look at discounts because that is to an individual. We are looking at the savings rate of the entire country. समझे आप? We will look at not at what have you invested, but we are looking at the investment rate of the entire country. समझे ना? Is this clear? है ना? I think this is clear. So what are the two factors which influence the so all the this thing. So when the government is trying to understand the supply side, mostly it understands both the demand and supply, but the focus is on the supply side, and it's trying to understand all the factors which can impact demand and supply at the aggregate level. है ना? It understands, don't have be under the wrong impression that government only is looking at the demand, the supply side of it. Supply side is the focus, but they are trying to understand various factors at demand and for both demand and supply side, or at demand and supply side for both the at aggregate level, and the decisions which impact the demand and supply at aggregate level is known as fiscal policy. है ना? Fiscal policy, and the fiscal policy includes, so fiscal policy is the action of the government. Now, anything that the government is trying to impact via the central bank will be known as what? Fiscal policy is of the government. So central bank impacts the central bank impacts what? The monetary policy. Absolutely correct. So bang on, and you are absolutely correct. So this, they impact the monetary policy. Here you are looking at the, what are you looking at when it comes to fiscal policy? So you are largely looking at expenditure, and where do you spend from? How does government spend? Where does it spend? From the revenue that it is making, which is from the exchequer, which is largely from the taxes. Yes, if it spends more, so deficit भी है. और अभी भी आपने देखा होगा, you would have noticed, RBI has transferred 3 lakh crores. So एक news, one article says 3 lakh, but it cannot be 3 lakh crores exactly. Dot. It has to be that number you're saying. हाँ, and it goes to the exchequer, which, and someone was asking, I think Ranit was asking that is it from what is this transfer all about, and why does it transfer? So it is absolutely okay. Otherwise, because RBI is a regulator, the idea is not to keep the money with themselves. They make money for the government. They vary departments. They are also regulators, so they also impose fines. They also collect money, but they also make money. They also have trading desks, if I understand correctly, and they make money, and a lot of money for the government. If my information is correct, then they make tremendous amount of money. And the 3 lakh crore is the overall money that they have made. And in the last couple of years itself, they must have transferred 10 lakh crores. Sometimes it's 3 lakh crores, sometimes 2 lakh crores, sometimes. So is transferring okay? Absolutely okay, because no, that is different thing. They will give it to the exchequer. Which account is good, I don't know. But what is the name of the account? But it is actual transfer. So that is because it says the word transfer. We can always check under what heading it appears. But it is, because if it is with RBI, then it's the prerogative of RBI how to spend, where to spend. It is the government's prerogative. It's all for development work that it gets transferred. Earlier it was not reported, publicized, but I think now it is a highly publicized number. Everyone knows about it. So they collect taxes, and RBI also transfers. It goes to the exchequer, and this money goes to the government for spending. John Maynard Keynes, he spoke about macroeconomics. So ये नाम याद कर लीजिए, especially from your exam perspective. This guy is known as John Maynard, Keynes. इतने सारे नाम हैं तो मैक्रो पकड़ लीजिए. 3 नाम है, पूरा गांव इसमें ना. And he spoke about, we have a book of John Maynard Keynes in this facility, in this premises, in this office, in this training center, which talks about general theory of employment. We have his book here, Employment. You should read that book, figure out a time to just flip through the pages. Interest and money. So employment is government's concern, so it is macroeconomic thing. Interest is government's concern, and money is RBI's thing. Again, it is the central bank's concern. So this, in short, when you look at the name of the book, you should understand that this is a macroeconomic book, not a microeconomic book. समझे ना आप? From the book itself. So if in the question, if they ask, this book was written by who, this guy, and which topic it addressed, so these are macroeconomic topics. So that level of clarity you should have. Okay. The importance and uses of macroeconomics in brief are as under. Okay, so macroeconomics का क्या क्या काम है? You will understand the general state of economy. है ना? तो state of economy लिखता हूँ, general state क्या है? It could be specialized state also, but ठीक है, those are words from the those are economic, मतलब those are the way of writing it. It's a professional way and I think academic way. State of economy के बारे में आप interested हो, you are interested in the domestic production. So essentially production. Why would you be interested in someone else's production? So I'm interested in production, which is obviously domestic production. I'm also interested in domestic consumption, which is obviously consumption. I'm interested in the price levels. Price level का दूसरा नाम क्या मैं दे सकता हूँ? Give me two names for price levels. And हाँ, एक inflation होगा, दूसरा volatility नहीं, volatility because वो तो थोड़ा statistic. ये CPI और WPI में I क्या है? Exactly. So one is absolute number 100, 200, 102, 105, 107. So that's an index. And when you look at the change, it's an inflation. So 102, say if it moves from 102 to 105, the gap in percentage terms is inflation. समझे? हाँ, so if in an index, this will be quoted like 102, 105, 107, 110. When you're measuring the gaps in the percentage, that is known as inflation. But this is an index. So price levels could be looked into two forms. Any economic site you go to, they will quote you two things. One is an index. So the CPI index, the consumer price index, and wholesale price index, and then they will separately quote the inflation in percentage terms. So other word is inflation, which is derived from the index. Understood? Clear hai na? I hope it is clear. At macroeconomic level, you are also looking at the drivers, hai na? The factors which drive income, savings, and investments and employment. Now, how do you remember all these complicated words? Two complicated factors. Well, in an exam, if you have to give a speech somewhere, lecture someone, deliver a lecture somewhere, see, everything is related to this word. If you remember this word, you'll remember everything. Once you have an employment starting August or September, you would have, then you would start thinking about, and then you start thinking. Everything is just think about what an employee does. Once he has an employment, he will think about income. When is the check coming? How much do I spend? And how much do I invest? The other side of the, flip the coin, the other side of the saving, the spend is savings. What you're not spending is savings, and the balance is. So ideally, we'll talk about in portfolio management class, you should invest 30% of your income to retire early. Okay? So you should invest 30% of your income. So these are all related words, and essentially it's your paycheck. So think about employment and what happens after that. Do you go to Zara's? Do you go to malls? Do you go to Phoenix? Do you go to Louis Vuitton? Do you go to Zudio? It's all about your behavior, and that is getting tracked at a macro level. That's about the drivers of income, savings, investments, and employment. They are just one factor. Then it talks about what macroeconomic also does is they helps government and central banks to formulate economic policies. So it helps the central bank, and it also helps. Let me just put it to make it simpler. So you have a central bank versus a central government, which is a federal government, which is also known as union. All these are similar words: central, federal, or simply government. It helps them, the macroeconomic policies, in drafting policies at macroeconomic level. So it also helps in formulating policies. है ना? समझे ना आप? इसके बिना आप ऑपरेट नहीं करते without macroeconomic. Understanding of macroeconomics is very important. So, doctor, so whether it is the present governor or whether it is the honorable finance minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji, or whether it was Dr. Manmohan Singh, or whether it was whoever was the finance minister at one time. So whoever has been there in this role, whether as a finance minister or as the governor of RBI, you would have to understand macroeconomic policies to a greater extent. I am sure Dr. Manmohan Singh would have graduated or done his PhD or done his masters and PhD in policy making um, in the macroeconomic policies. Otherwise, he would possibly he would not have been selected as the governor of RBI and then the finance minister. So he was governor earlier. Some of the notes, currency, you'll see it's his signature, and then he was picked up as a finance minister. So I think then any economic advisor to the PM, for example, Sanjeev Sayalji is there. Honorable Sanjeev Sayalji is there, as part of the economic advisory committee. All of them understand macroeconomics very well. Micro is not important. Macro is very important for all government policy makers, and also for policy makers / the central bankers. It also helps you in understanding international trade. International trade of what? So, for example, if you are negotiating with Trump administration, you don't require microeconomic policies, or you don't need to be specialized, or you don't need to be a specialist of microeconomics. If you are discussing this, negotiating this with Trump, whether goods and services, you would need to understand what? Macroeconomics. So, international trade, agar aapko samajhna hai, and if you have to argue and present your case, you need to understand, and especially if you have to fight off Trump administration's pressure and be a part of the negotiations. Okay, now, so ये तो आप समझ लो बहुत clearly that in the negotiation committee there would be central bankers. I mean, people from the monetary policy side, the central banker side. There will be people from the policy side of it, but all of them would have a very good understanding of macroeconomic policies. So when Piyush Goyal Sahab goes for negotiation along with his team, because he's a trade and commerce minister, I'm sure he has a very good understanding of macroeconomic policies, or he's been briefed with. So ये बात भूलोगे नहीं आप, because now you can think of Trump, and you would also need to understand the interlinkages across the economy. So how interlinkages work, how different sectors are connected to each other. So how interlinkages of economies work, what wrong button you should not press, because it can have a significant impact. For example, it does mention about this example, this textbook mentions about the RBI's intervention during the inflation at this point in India was really high, is what I understand, and also this research says. So it says that RBI's attempt to tame the high inflation in India. I think this is a classic period that you should study, that you should know. Just go on TradingView and plot the inflation chart and the interest rate chart. The inflation chart of India and the interest rate chart, which I will show you, and we'll end this class now. We'll do part B of this one because this is a long chapter. We have other members also waiting. So interest rate, let's plot this on TradingView and investigate 2011, 12 and 13. Why? Because the answer of your assignment, Harsh, which possibly will come sometime during this century, the problem of NPA is also linked to this one. So you'll have to investigate this very, very well. This one assignment is very, very important, and it started building up since 2001. So we'll plot it. Is very, very important phenomena. A lot of banks start failing, NBFCs. And 2013, someone told me, one of my old colleagues told me that the bankers are really scared. A lot of people will be fired in the coming period. That is when the cleanup starts of the NPAs in the Indian banking system. So what had happened in 2011, 12, 13 is very important. You should know as finance students. Please look at that NPA case study, which is very, very important. And what has happened is they tried to control it, but it did not produce the desired results. Something went wrong, seriously wrong. So RBI was trying to tame the inflation, but it does not work. And what would you do to tame the inflation? You will, as a central banker, what would you do? You would reduce the interest rate. So when you reduce the interest, to tame the inflation, would you reduce the interest rate? You will increase the interest. They go hand in hand. They are directly proportional. Agar aap, it's like putting fuel in the fire. So if inflation is going up, correct. So if inflation moves up, the interest rate also goes up, and this is the first level of interest rate is the repo rate or the Fed rate. In US they call it Fed rate. This is the first level. First level matlab RBI lends to the bank. So that's repo rate, and reverse repo rate is when the banks lend to RBI. So that's the first level of lending happening, from a central bank to a scheduled bank. Then from the bank, then it goes to the individuals, or maybe from one bank it goes to the other banks. You also have overnight lending facility where one bank is lending overnight, to meet its requirements and its maybe the norms that they have to maintain. So overnight lending is also there. Say for example, some banks ATM run dry, so money will immediately come, get filled up. You have loaned it. The second day, the shutter opens up. The consumer deposits in this bank, which was running short of cash. Consumers come. I mean, the depositors come. The customers come. They deposit. So then the money goes back from where it had come. So there are overnight lending rates also. So, and that's put in a very simple term. So first level of lending is happening here, which is at the repo rate. So if inflation goes up, the interest rate, and I भूल जाइए अभी के लिए, interest rate goes up. And likewise, if inflation goes down, the interest rate also goes down. That means there is a direct relation between inflation and and हाँ, तो this is with the intervention of central bank. Automatic नहीं जाता. This is with the MPC. MPC is what? Monetary Policy Committee meets every quarter. Like you have seen, they met between 3rd and 5th. They will decide that they want to reduce, but they are taking inputs from it. But in a way, we can say that it is directly related, though it will not follow. अब इसमें आपने जो बोला, if the inflation goes up and if you decrease the interest rate, it is like adding fuel to the fire and it will explode. It will. But please remember, this is a double-edged sword, because when the inflation is very high and the economy is not doing well, and you increase the interest rate, then you are killing your own companies, the industries, because you have increased the borrowing cost. So the government has to be very cautious. The central bank has to be very cautious. They watch carefully before they increase or decrease, because in many instances, not just in India, I think in one instance that is mentioned here, and many instances outside India, it has backfired. So that you have to know. For example, Zimbabwe has a 1,000,000% inflation. Just now we saw Turkey has 37% interest. Turkish lira crashed in COVID, just dropped like anything. 37% official rate. So inflation जो है, जो interest rate जो आप देखते हो ना, है ना? So this leads to, मतलब, how do I explain? So yeah, interest rate has one component which is known as inflation. The component of interest rate, what goes inside into making of the interest rate is one of the components. It is inflation that goes. So inflation is again the independent factor, and this is the dependent factor. Okay, and I think to just end the session here, just to ensure that so we'll end it here, and tomorrow we are looking at the national, so various ways to measure the economy. So how do you measure the national income? This is for tomorrow. How do you measure the national income? Obviously, national income is at macroeconomic level. What are the methods that you use for tomorrow? One is the product method. Second is the income method. And third is the expenditure method. Okay. So in one case, you are looking at the products, the sum of goods and services produced in the country. In the second case, you are looking at income of the people, all sorts of income, in domestic as well as export. And then you are looking at expenditure, how much GNP and all will be, that is gross national product here. So you are looking at, and then GDP, and there is a difference between GDP and GNP. What is the difference between GDP and GNP? हाँ, तो उन दोनों में डिफरेंस क्या, व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस? हाँ, विल ऑल्सो बी कंप्यूटेड एज पार्ट ऑफ द जीएनपी, है ना। तो उसमें आप बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट इनकम जो है, एंड इसके बाद फिर कैड जो है, मतलब करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट वर्सेस व्हाट इज कैपिटल अकाउंट डेफिसिट, और excess of it, we will study. So we'll look at the national income tomorrow, savings and investment, inflation, unemployment rate. We'll also look at what is FDI, what is FPI. We'll look at what are the fiscal policies and their impact, and then monetary policies and their impact. Then we are looking at international trade, exchange rate, and trade deficit, and the globalization is positive. And what I found really interesting was in this chapter is these secular, cyclical, and seasonal trends, which people are not talking about. So one is a seasonal trend, one is a cyclical trend, the other is one is a secular trend. It all relates to the economy. So we will discuss about it, है ना, in the next class. So I think part B of chapter 5 we will cover tomorrow. ठीक है? Is that okay?